You ever notice how comfort doesn't feel dangerous? It doesn't scream. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't break down your door in the middle of the night. No, it whispers. It tells you, relax, you deserve this. Sauce. It says, you can start tomorrow. Saying slowly, quietly, it starts taking pieces of you. Your discipline, your hunger, your edge. Funny thing is you don't even realize it's happening. Because comfort doesn't look like an enemy. It feels like a reward. But what if I told you the very thing you run to for peace is the same thing destroying your future? What if the real villain in your story isn't failure, it's comfort? Today I'm going to show you the dark side of comfort. The side no one warns you about. The side that smiles while it ruins you. And by the end of this, you might start seeing your safe place a little differently. Comfort feels harmless because it wraps itself in the language of care. It tells you to rest a little longer, to avoid stress, to take it easy just this once. Nothing about it seems threatening. In fact, it feels like the reward you've earned after effort. But the problem isn't comfort itself. It's how easily it becomes a default. When comfort turns into your normal state, discipline starts to fade without making any noise. You don't wake up one day and suddenly lose your discipline. It slips away in small, almost invisible moments. Choosing to delay instead of act. Deciding to stay where it's easy instead of pushing into something challenging. Telling yourself that you'll start tomorrow, and then repeating the same thought the next day. Each decision feels insignificant on its own, but together they build a pattern. And that pattern slowly reshapes who you are. Comfort trains your mind to avoid resistance. Discipline, on the other hand, is built on facing resistance again and again. When you constantly choose what feels good in the moment, your tolerance for discomfort shrinks. Tasks that once felt manageable begin to feel overwhelming. Your focus weakens, your consistency breaks, and your standards quietly drop. You start accepting less from yourself, not because you want to fail, but because you've become used to ease. There's also a hidden psychological shift that happens. Comfort makes you justify your inaction. You start creating reasons that sound logical, even responsible. You tell yourself you're protecting your energy, waiting for the right time, or avoiding unnecessary stress. But beneath those explanations is a simple truthy. You're choosing what's easy over what's necessary. And the more you repeat that choice, the harder it becomes to reverse it. What makes comfort dangerous is that it doesn't create immediate consequences. If you skip one effort, nothing terrible happens. If you relax instead of working, the world doesn't collapse. This lack of instant punishment tricks your brain into thinking the choice was harmless. But discipline isn't destroyed in a single moment. It's eroded over time. By the time the results show up, the habits are already deeply rooted. Comfort also disconnects you from your long-term vision. Discipline is driven by purpose, by a clear sense of where you're going and why it matters. But comfort pulls your attention into the present moment, into whatever feels easiest right now. It makes you prioritize short-term relief over long-term growth. And slowly, your goals begin to feel distant, less urgent, almost optional. There's a subtle loss of identity that comes with this. When you consistently choose comfort, you stop seeing yourself as someone who follows through. You begin to doubt your own reliability. Promises you make to yourself start to feel meaningless because you've broken them too many times. This isn't just about productivity anymore. It's about how you see yourself. And once that self-image weakens, discipline becomes even harder to rebuild. Comfort doesn't force you to quit. It simply makes you okay with not trying your hardest. It lowers your expectations in a way that feels natural, almost reasonable. You tell yourself you're doing enough, even when you know deep down that you're capable of more. Over time, enough becomes your ceiling, and your potential remains untouched. The most dangerous part is how invisible all of this is. There's no dramatic moment where you realize what's happening. No clear warning sign that says your discipline is slipping away. It happens quietly, behind your daily choices, hidden inside routines that feel normal. And because it feels normal, you don't question it. Comfort feels safe because it protects you from effort, from failure, from discomfort. But in doing so, it also protects you from growth. It keeps you in a state where nothing challenges you, and without challenge, there is no reason for discipline to exist. Over time, your ability to push yourself weakens, not because you lack strength, but because you've stopped using it. Small excuses rarely sound dangerous. They come wrapped in logic, in tiredness, in just this once. You tell yourself it's not a big deal to skip today, to delay a task, to choose ease over effort for a moment. And in isolation, it truly doesn't seem like it matters. One missed action doesn't destroy your goals. One delay doesn't define your future. That's exactly why it's so easy to accept. The real damage begins when these small excuses start repeating. The brain is wired to follow patterns, and every time you justify avoiding something difficult, you strengthen that pattern. It becomes easier the next time. The resistance you once felt begins to fade, not because you become stronger, but because you've stopped challenging it. You slowly train yourself to escape discomfort instead of facing it. Excuses have a way of sounding responsible. You convince yourself you're being practical, that you need rest, that the timing isn't right, or that you'll perform better later. These thoughts feel reasonable, even intelligent. But beneath that surface is a quiet shift in priorities. You're no longer acting based on what matters most. You're acting based on what feels easiest right now. Over time, these decisions start to stack. One delay turns into a habit of postponing. One skipped effort turns into inconsistency. And inconsistency is where goals begin to weaken. It's not that you've given up completely. It's that you're no longer showing up with the same intensity, the same commitment, or the same standard. Your actions become unpredictable, and progress slows down without you fully noticing. There's also a subtle erosion of trust that happens within yourself. Every time you make a promise and break it with an excuse, you weaken your own sense of reliability. At first, it doesn't feel serious, but eventually your words lose weight in your own mind. You start expecting yourself to quit, to delay, to choose the easier path. That expectation becomes a self-fulfilling cycle, where discipline feels harder simply because you no longer believe you'll follow through. Excuses also shrink your tolerance for effort. When you consistently avoid discomfort, even small challenges begin to feel overwhelming. Tasks that once required moderate focus now feel exhausting. Your mental endurance decreases, and your ability to push through resistance weakens. This creates a false perception that things are getting harder, when in reality, your capacity to handle them has diminished. What makes this process dangerous is how gradual it is. There's no clear breaking point, no moment where everything collapses. Instead, your standards slowly adjust downward. What you once considered unacceptable becomes normal. What you once pushed through becomes something you avoid. And because the change is so subtle, it feels natural, almost justified. Small excuses also disconnect you from the bigger picture. When you focus on immediate relief, you lose sight of long-term consequences. The brain prioritizes comfort in the present, making it easy to ignore how today's choices affect tomorrow's results. This creates a gap between your intentions and your actions. You still want success, growth, and discipline, but your daily behavior no longer supports those outcomes. There's a hidden cost to constantly choosing the easier option. It's not just lost time or missed opportunities. It's the gradual shaping of your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who hesitates, someone who delays, someone who doesn't fully commit. And once that identity takes hold, it influences every future decision you make. Excuses don't destroy goals instantly. They work slowly, quietly, and consistently. Each one seems harmless, but together they create a system that pulls you away from progress. The danger isn't in the size of the excuse, it's in how often you allow it. Discipline is often misunderstood as something harsh, rigid, or even unnatural. But at its core, it's simply the ability to act despite discomfort. And that's where most people struggle. Not because they lack goals or ambition, but because they resist the feeling that comes with effort. Discomfort shows up in many forms: mental fatigue, boredom, frustration, uncertainty. None of these feel good, and the natural instinct is to avoid them. The problem is that avoiding discomfort doesn't remove it, it just shifts it. When you choose not to face a difficult task, you might feel relief in the moment, but that relief is temporary. The pressure doesn't disappear, it builds quietly in the background. Deadlines get closer, opportunities pass, and stress increases. What you avoided earlier often returns in a stronger, more overwhelming form later. Discipline flips this pattern. Instead of running from discomfort, it teaches you to move toward it. Not because discomfort is enjoyable, but because it's necessary. Growth requires friction. Improvement demands effort. And effort always carries some level of unease. When you begin to accept this, your relationship with discomfort changes. It stops being something to escape and becomes something to use. There's a mental shift that happens when you consistently choose to face what's difficult. You start realizing that discomfort is not as dangerous as it feels. The anticipation is often worse than the experience itself. Once you push through that initial resistance, the task becomes manageable. This realization builds confidence, not the loud, visible kind, but a quiet certainty that you can handle more than you thought. Avoiding discomfort, on the other hand, makes it grow. The less you face it, the more intimidating it becomes. Small challenges begin to feel like major obstacles. Your mind exaggerates the difficulty because it's not used to dealing with it. Over time, this creates a cycle where even simple actions require significant effort just to begin. Discipline breaks that cycle by exposing you to discomfort regularly, making it familiar instead of frightening. There's also an element of control involved. When you rely on motivation alone, your actions become tied to how you feel. On days when you feel energized, you perform well. On days when you don't, you hesitate or stop. This creates inconsistency. Discipline, however, is not dependent on mood. It operates even when you don't feel ready. By acting despite discomfort, you take control away from your emotions and place it into your decisions. Embracing discomfort also sharpens focus. When you allow yourself to sit with something challenging instead of escaping it, your mind adapts. You learn to concentrate for longer periods, to work through frustration, and to stay engaged even when progress feels slow. This builds mental endurance, which is essential for any form of meaningful achievement. There's a quiet strength that develops through this process. It's not something others always notice immediately, but it shows in your consistency, in your ability to keep going when things aren't easy. You stop relying on perfect conditions or ideal timing. Instead, you become someone who can move forward regardless of how things feel in the moment. Discomfort also acts as a filter. It separates intention from action. Many people want success, growth, or change, but not everyone is willing to go through the discomfort required to achieve it. By choosing to embrace that discomfort, you position yourself differently. You begin to operate in a space where fewer people are willing to go, which naturally increases your chances of progress. It's important to understand that embracing discomfort doesn't mean pushing yourself to extremes or ignoring your limits. It means recognizing the difference between necessary effort and unnecessary avoidance. It means choosing to do what matters even when it's inconvenient, even when it requires energy you'd rather save. Over time, this repeated choice builds discipline, not as a forced habit, but as a natural response. You stop negotiating with yourself over every task. You stop waiting for the right feeling to appear. Instead, you act, and through that action, you strengthen your ability to continue acting in the future. Instant pleasure feels harmless because it rewards you immediately. It gives you a quick sense of satisfaction, a brief escape from effort, a moment where everything feels easy and enjoyable. Whether it's scrolling endlessly, choosing entertainment over work, or avoiding a difficult task, the effect is the same. You get a small hit of comfort right now, and your brain registers it as something valuable. The issue isn't the pleasure itself, it's the timing. When rewards come instantly, they begin to replace the deeper, more meaningful satisfaction that comes from effort and patience. Your mind starts to prioritize what feels good now over what actually benefits you later. This shift happens quietly, without any clear signal that something is going wrong. But over time, it begins to shape your decisions in ways that pull you away from your goals. There's a biological side to this. The brain is wired to seek rewards and avoid discomfort. Instant pleasure delivers a quick reward with almost no effort, making it highly attractive. Every time you choose it, your brain reinforces that pathway, making it easier to repeat the behavior. Slowly, this creates a habit where you default to immediate gratification instead of long-term thinking. The problem is that meaningful progress rarely offers instant rewards. Building discipline, improving skills, or achieving goals requires consistent effort over time, often without immediate results. When your brain becomes used to quick satisfaction, these slower processes start to feel unrewarding. You lose patience. You begin to question whether the effort is worth it, not because it isn't, but because you've trained yourself to expect faster outcomes. This creates a gap between what you want and what you actually do. You might have clear goals, strong intentions, and even a plan, But when the moment comes to act, instant pleasure becomes more appealing. It's easier to choose what feels good now than to invest in something that will only pay off later. And because the consequences aren't immediate, the choice feels justified. Over time, this pattern begins to erode your discipline. You become less consistent, less focused, and more reactive. Instead of directing your actions toward a purpose, you start responding to impulses. Your day gets shaped by whatever offers the quickest reward, rather than what moves you forward. This makes progress slower and less predictable. There's also a psychological effect. When you repeatedly choose instant pleasure over effort, you start associating work with discomfort and avoidance. Tasks that require focus begin to feel heavier than they actually are. You approach them with resistance, sometimes even dread, because your mind has been conditioned to prefer easier alternatives. This makes it harder to even begin, which further delays progress. Another hidden cost is the loss of depth. Instant pleasure is often shallow. It gives you a quick feeling but doesn't contribute to growth or long-term satisfaction. In contrast, effort-based rewards are deeper and more lasting. They build confidence, skill, and a sense of accomplishment. But these require time and persistence, which instant gratification tends to undermine. As this cycle continues, your standards begin to shift. You start settling for smaller, easier wins instead of pursuing larger, more meaningful goals. Not because you lack ambition, but because your habits are pulling you in a different direction. The more you rely on instant pleasure, the harder it becomes to tolerate the delay required for real progress. The danger lies in how normal this becomes. Instant gratification is everywhere, built into daily life in ways that feel routine. Because it's so common, it doesn't feel like a threat. But when it consistently replaces effort, it slowly reshapes your behavior. It reduces your ability to stay focused, to delay rewards, and to commit to long-term goals. This isn't about removing all forms of enjoyment. It's about recognizing how easily immediate rewards can take control if left unchecked. When you become aware of this pattern, you start to see how your choices are influenced. And with that awareness, you gain the ability to shift your actions back toward what truly matters, even if it requires waiting, effort, and patience. Growth doesn't announce itself with comfort. It doesn't arrive when everything feels easy, predictable, and safe. It begins the moment you step into something uncertain, something slightly uncomfortable, something that challenges the version of you that wants to stay the same. That edge, where things stop feeling easy, is where change starts to take shape. Comfort creates stability, but it also creates limits. When you stay within what feels familiar, you repeat the same patterns, think the same thoughts, and produce the same results. There's no pressure to adapt, no reason to push further. Everything remains controlled, but nothing truly evolves. Growth requires a disruption of that pattern, a shift away from what you already know into something that demands more from you. That shift often feels uncomfortable because it exposes gaps. You become aware of what you don't know, what you haven't mastered, where you're still weak. This awareness can feel discouraging at first, which is why many people retreat back into comfort. It's easier to stay where you feel capable than to step into a space where you might struggle. But that struggle is exactly what creates improvement. When you move beyond comfort, you engage parts of yourself that remain inactive otherwise. Your focus sharpens, your problem-solving increases, your resilience begins to build. You're forced to adapt, to think differently, to respond instead of react. These changes don't happen when everything is easy. They happen when something demands more than what you're currently used to giving. There's also a psychological resistance to leaving comfort. The mind prefers certainty. It wants to avoid risk, avoid failure, avoid anything that might create discomfort. So it creates reasons to stay where you are. It tells you that now isn't the right time, that you need to be more prepared, that you should wait until things feel easier. These thoughts feel logical, but they often serve as barriers rather than guidance. Growth doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It happens through action, often before you feel ready. The first step into discomfort is rarely smooth. It feels awkward, sometimes frustrating, sometimes slow. Progress isn't immediate, and results aren't guaranteed. But each step builds something beneath the surface. A stronger mindset, a higher tolerance for effort, a deeper understanding of what you're capable of. As you continue, something begins to change. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel manageable. the resistance decreases, not because the task has become easier, but because you've adapted to it. Your capacity has expanded. This is how growth works. It stretches you gradually, turning unfamiliar challenges into familiar territory over time. There's also a shift in identity that takes place. When you consistently step outside your comfort zone, you begin to see yourself differently. You're no longer someone who avoids difficulty. You become someone who faces it. This change in self-perception influences your future actions. You start approaching challenges with more confidence, not because they're easier, but because you trust your ability to handle them. Avoiding discomfort keeps that transformation from happening. It keeps your potential in a dormant state where it exists but isn't expressed. You may have the ability to grow, to improve, to achieve more, but without stepping beyond comfort, that ability remains unused. Growth isn't just about what you could do. It's about what you actually choose to do when faced with resistance. There's a cost to staying comfortable for too long. It creates a sense of stagnation, a feeling that time is passing without meaningful progress. This isn't always obvious at first, but over time, it becomes harder to ignore. You begin to notice the gap between where you are and where you could be. And that gap often comes from repeatedly choosing comfort over challenge. Stepping beyond comfort doesn't guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees movement. It ensures that you're no longer standing still, no longer repeating the same cycle. Each effort, each attempt, each moment of discomfort contributes to a larger process of change. And within that process, growth becomes not just possible, but inevitable.